Thank you. I'm hoping you can hear me all right. I chose to use the mic. Is everybody okay with the volume? Okay. So I like to do these presentations somewhat informally. I want to talk with you. I don't necessarily want to talk at you. There's a lot of research here. There's a lot to talk about. This is part of the story, but I have many different variations of this presentation and many different things that we can explore, look at, talk about. So if you have questions, don't worry about interrupting me. If you are curious about something, feel free to ask to jump in. And because I've been a high school teacher for, this is my 16th year now, I might ask you some questions as well because it's only fair. So we're going to talk about the Civil War battle flag, which is an artifact that was given to Hollidaysburg Area School District in the 1930s. But it has a very long history going back to, we think, about 1861, and we'll go through all of that. Because it is the University of Antietam, I'll also tell you about Antietam at least a little bit, but the unit that the flag belonged to was not fully engaged at Antietam. They were there, and you can see they wrote, it was said that they wrote after every battle the name of the battle on the flag. I do not think that that's accurate. I think that's a mismemory, and that's what we have to deal with as historians. Sometimes these veterans are talking about things that happened 50 years ago, 60 years ago, so they might have embellished or they might not remember. So they said after every battle they wrote it down, but if you look, the handwriting is very even. The printing looks all the same. I do not buy that it was that it was written down in the heat of battle somehow. It's silly, but that's what was remembered in the documentation. And you'll see that Antietam is on there, but they were only at Antietam briefly, and they were only in support. So instead of talking much about what they did during the battle, I'm going to talk about how people in this area knew what they knew about the battle, when they knew it, and what they thought about it. And then we'll look at kind of the height of their involvement in the Civil War, and that is in the Battle of Gettysburg. So they actually fought in the wheat field at Gettysburg. Are you familiar with the wheat field at all? It's one of the most hotly contested places in the battlefield, probably the second most famous, well, maybe third, after Pickett's Charge, Devil's Den, and then the wheat field. And the wheat field is some of the hardest to figure out what happened. And historians will tell you, even the people that were there didn't know what was going on. It was so chaotic. But what's really cool is we have some unique documentation that even the head of the Park Service at Gettysburg, where we presented the flag in late 2015, had never seen that documentation. So I'm going to show that to you as well. And you're some of the only people that have had the privilege to see that. And then we're going to talk about how they tried to be remembered, how they over time saw themselves, not only surviving the battlefield, but then gradually not surviving time. Because as I always tell my students, you can survive battle, you can survive war, but nobody survives time. And so as they're starting to lose each other and lose their lives, they tried to be remembered, and we'll talk about how they went about that and were they successful and how we can pick up where they left off. So I'm going to start with the basics. Civil War breaks out, and Abraham Lincoln issues a call to war, right? A call for initial enlistment. These first men are only enlisted for 3 months. We call them the 90 days men. And people from Hollidaysburg caught onto this, and like many young men throughout the country, they rushed to sign up. And so the president, as you can see, issued this proclamation asking for 75,000 volunteers. I don't think anybody at the time knew how hard it was to outfit 75,000 volunteers, or to feed them, or what they were going to do with them, or even where they were going to report to be trained. It was kind of a mess. And so when the Hollidaysburg young men rushed to go to war, they also had no idea what they were getting into. Hollidaysburg, where they're from and where the flag currently resides, in 1861 is actually quite bustling. It's a thriving industrial center. It's got 2,000 residents, and it makes most of its money through the canal system. The canal system, which was completed before the Civil War, and helped the town grow. But the canal system, it's kind of funny, is a dual-edged sword, because the canal system is great, but it's also a large body of standing water. And does anybody know what likes a large body of standing water? Yeah, lots of diseases, and also mosquitoes. So malaria goes through the roof, and so even though it helps the town grow, people kind of don't like it in their backyard. It's also staunchly pro-union. This is a story that was told to me by another local historian, but that There's even a moment in response to the Fugitive Slave Act that people are apprehended, taken to the courthouse to be returned to the South, and some of the people from Hollidaysburg actually attacked the slave catchers in order to release their captives, who were then sent along to safer areas. I believe they ended up in Canada. And so they are very pro-union, and they really support going to war. There's a little moment in the newspaper here that you can kind of see. I'll put my cursor on it. It said that, nothing else than this, by which they mean volunteering and joining the fight, nothing less than this on the part of the President of the United States will satisfy union sentiment everywhere. Nothing else would be right. And that's run in the local newspapers. That one's from the Tribune. And so Hollidaysburg sent these volunteers off to war. What they did was they formed around an existing company, people who had existed and had fought in the Mexican War. So there were a couple left, and they formed a company that they called the Juniata Rifles. The Juniata Rifles, they went off to war, but they never fought. So they never saw combat. They were trained. One of their great accomplishments was that in training, they captured the Tyrone Cavalry. They were very proud of this. Yeah. But then they were sent home, as were many of the 90 Days men. They're too hard to keep. They're too hard to outfit. Their terms of service expired before they saw combat. And so they came back home. And while it says that they received packages containing towels and handkerchiefs and thread and buttons, and they really appreciated the people donating those to them and sending them off to camp where they were, when they came home, they said they received a warm welcome, but then there must have been some side-eyeing that went on, because one of the members of what becomes the 62nd runs a notice, and he says, "Did those premature patriots but emulate the example thus shown to them instead of staying at home, prating like old grannies about loyalty and patriotism, things they know nothing about? They would take their muskets in hand and endeavor to improve upon the example already set for them." We can gather they were making fun of them for having never fought. And so he said, "You guys aren't patriots. You didn't go to war. Stop making fun of other people just because we weren't sent into battle." And they need to prove themselves. So they immediately form a new company when they're sent home. So they come home, and there's a recruiting station set up, and they decide that they're going to go back to war, but they're going to do it now as regular volunteers. And so they call themselves the Blair County Sharpshooters, which very boisterous name for a bunch of kids who have still never fought. And I will say that they did quite well in training. And at first, they didn't know what to do with these guys. So they got bounced around to different recruitment centers, and they actually end up in Pittsburgh, where they formed Company M of the 62nd Pennsylvania. But for a while, their letters home are very confused. They're like, "Oh, we're part of this unit. Oh, never mind, we're part of that unit." And they didn't know where to go. And if you know anything about Civil War regiments, Company M's basically don't exist. They're an extra one, they're tacked on, but they actually do quite well in training. And what I have here, sorry, I'm used to a screen to point at, this is another article that's sent out. This one is a song that's designed to recruit. And he said, your names will shine in glory on the brightest page of fame, and your deeds will live in stories. Like, come join us, we're awesome. That's by a young man named Blaine. Blaine's interesting, because Blaine is going to be our primary way of knowing what this unit is up to, because he is both a soldier and a correspondent for the Altoona Tribune. But what's interesting about Blaine is we see him through various battles. We see him through Antietam, we see him through Fredericksburg, and all of a sudden he disappears. And when my students and I were first researching, because they were helping me initially while we were researching this project, we were like, "Oh, did he die?" Looked in the death rolls. No, he's not dead. Okay, what happened to this guy? Dug a little deeper, just couldn't find him. And then finally he's listed as having deserted. So he's writing all the songs about how wonderful war is, but he gets to war and it's not something that he expected. It's not what he signed up for. He also says that this is going to be a crack company. It's formed under Captain Crozier, and they're well drilled. They already know what they're doing. I can prove to you that they actually kind of did know what they're doing, because if you look at the uniform here, those of you who are familiar with the Civil War, is this a typical Civil War uniform? No, it's most similar to a Zouave uniform, kind of, but it's not even really a Zouave uniform. It's a French imported uniform, and it was supposed to be given to the company that could drill the best. So they had this kind of competition for who could follow orders, who could drill, who could use their muskets, who knew the manual of arms the best. And the guys from Blair County, the only ones not from Pittsburgh or the surrounding areas, they're the ones who won. So, that may have been a little hard for everyone else to take, but they were, as a reward, issued these uniforms. And so they took these uniforms into battle, and this lasts a very short amount of time when they sent them back. Because if you look at them, can we agree that living in these, walking in these, sleeping in these is not going to be comfortable? No, the pants are in the French pattern, kind of, borrowed from them, and they're really baggy. There are some Zouaves that do wear them throughout the war, but they decided they didn't want them. So they ship them back and they adopt standard uniforms for most of the war. But what's fascinating is that these guys, the ones who make it the entire way through the war, actually reformed again after they ran out of men during Gettysburg. So they reformed as the 91st, and then they were reissued these uniforms in the last month of the war. So the uniforms actually met them. Yeah. But they go to war now for real this time. And the sharpshooters, before they leave, they are given the flag that currently resides in the public library in Hollidaysburg. We don't know exactly what happened, and it is one of my great sadnesses as a historian that I cannot tell you exactly who was involved in creating this flag. When this was donated to the school district in the 1930s, there was a little note with it, and it said it was donated by the energetic young women of Hollidaysburg. Who are they? No idea. I really, really wish we could find them, but all of the Hollidaysburg newspapers that I've been able to track down are missing the years of the Civil War. So the Standard is missing the years of the Civil War, and it has other years, but not these ones. So I was hoping a Hollidaysburg newspaper might report on this, like Altoona newspapers reported on what their young women were doing and the name of their group, but I have not found who these people are, who was involved. But supposedly they held a ball in the old town hall, and they said that they called for a volunteer to carry the flag. Now, you got to remember, they're Victorians, and if you've read anything by Victorians, they tend to be very dramatic. So some of the writings say, they called forth a volunteer, and he went and he vowed to carry the flag with him. The guy who volunteered was Jack Mufti. Now, sometimes, and I've even been guilty of this, it's referred to as a battle flag, and that's because that's how the documentation later refers to it. It is not a battle flag. It's not big enough. It's a guide-on, so it was used to mark kind of the end of where the regiment was. Company M is last, so they're marking the end of their unit. The real battle flag is in Pittsburgh, in Soldiers and Sailors, I believe. But anyway, they took this with them, and Jack Mufti said, supposedly, by the documentation we have, although I can't prove it, he's said to have said that he would take it, he would sleep with it, he would keep it safe, and he'd return with it in glory to Hollidaysburg. And then they got on a train and left. How much of this is true? We don't know. We know that the son of one of the unit members who donated this in Hollidaysburg believed it to be true. So can we trust his word? We don't know. But sometimes in history we have stories and we can't really prove them, and this is one of them. But its provenance is good. We know its age is appropriate. We know that we had it professionally conserved, and they agreed that it is a Civil War artifact. So we know the age, we know where it went, we know who had it most of the time. We actually, through a young man named Michael Halloran, who I'll talk about in a little bit, had the flag for most of the time post-Civil War. So it kind of is very clear where it went, but where it came from, that's less clear. So here's some of the people that I'm going to talk about and some of the people that we know. First of all, we do know Blaine. He's the early war correspondent. He deserts in '62, sometime between Fredericksburg and Gettysburg. Where exactly he deserted is not clear. He's listed as visiting family for a while, and then he jumps and he joins another company, and then he's listed as back in Hollidaysburg, and it gets weird with him, so we don't know exactly where he deserted. Jack Mufti, who carried the flag, supposedly he kept an extensive Civil War journal. We have not found it, so if anybody knows any collectors, Mufti's Civil War journal is gone. He's listed at one of the events kind of reading through his Civil War journal, but we don't know where it is. Michael Halloran, he enlists as a drummer as a very young man, and then he is instrumental in preserving the flag and carrying on the legacy of this unit. He kind of takes charge of the history post-war as everybody else is dying. I would only assume because he's younger than everybody else, so he lives longer than most of them. And then what's really cool, that I'm going to show you, is we've got Sergeant Martin, so First Sergeant, R.N. Martin, it's Robert Newton Martin. What's really cool about him is he does keep an extensive Civil War journal, which is actually an account. He said that he actually copied it because while he was in a prison camp, it got ruined by rain, so he had to recopy all of it by hand, which he did while he was recovering in the hospital from said prison camp. I guess he, it's kind of difficult to survive those conditions. So in his couple of months of recovery, he just copied his journal, and we have a copy of that. And then we've got later First Sergeant John R. Garden. Sometimes he's referred to as John R. Gardner. We do not know which is correct. He's listed in different sources as Garden or Gardner. His tombstone, I believe, says Garden, but his phone address in the Altoona phone book, once phones became a thing, is Gardner. So it's a little confusing with him. But he also kept an extensive Civil War journal. Unfortunately, either some of it is lost, or he kept more than one and we only have the one. He starts writing in 61, gets promoted in 62 and stops writing. And then he starts writing again in 63. Why? I couldn't tell you. And then after 63, he has a couple of entries from 64 and then nothing. So either he started writing and then stopped, but when he's writing a lot. So my guess, and it's just a guess, is that he was writing somewhere else and jumping back and forth, but no way to know that for sure. He also, once Blaine deserts, becomes the new writer to the Tribune, so becomes the new war correspondent. So we have a lot of his words, which is actually really cool. Early on, they had some foibles, and I'll read you what they wrote back home. If you look on the left here, he said, this is from Blaine. He said, "I suppose you are aware that several of our troops were captured by rebels a few days since while foraging. The capture of men who are silly enough to leave their guns is not much to be regretted, and I think there are plenty of better men to take their places." You can laugh, it's kind of funny. So they got captured while out foraging, which read that as stealing stuff from around them. And unfortunately, they didn't take weapons with them, so they were, captured by rebels pretty easily. And then he's like, there are better men, it's fine. Those were not the guys from his own company that he's talking about, so one can probably assume it's the Pittsburgh guys that he was making fun of. But he takes the time in this very long correspondence to write all about this event and poke fun at these young men. They are later paroled because it's pretty early in the war, so they get to come back. But then things do get serious. And they hit their first real action in 1862 when Colonel Black is shot. Now, it's somebody that they've trained with, they've fought with, that they adored, that they wanted to see promoted, and he's unfortunately shot through the head. They think by a sniper or somebody in a tree, it's what they said. And he said, "No braver man nor better soldier entered that or any other battle than he." They love him so much that they are still choosing to name things after him in the post-war era. And he's somebody that they remember very, very fondly, really through the rest of their lives. And if you know anything about soldiers, they don't always love their commanding officers that much. So, it is a real loss for them. For them then, rather than saying, oh, guys went and got captured, war suddenly got real for them. And then Antietam happens and things get more real. So because I'm a teacher and because I've been talking long enough for a moment, I want to see what you know about Antietam since it is the anniversary of Antietam. So find someone near you and tell them something you know about Antietam. Go ahead. Okay, I'm going to come on back. Tell me one interesting thing. Who's brave? What's that? Cool, what else?
It's the single bloodiest day in the Civil War.
I heard that in about all of the places, right? Honestly, single bloodiest day in American history if you count all casualties, right? Not the bloodiest battle, but the bloodiest 12 hours or so. Anything else?
first use of ambulances.
And the ambulances are interesting because this is the first time you get that rotational system where you have field hospitals and then you have people being sent to later hospitals. And what's interesting is not only do we know that happened, I can prove it to you because we can see it in the newspapers. And that's very different from coverage that's early on. Do you guys happen to know who won?
Well, both of them said they won.
Yeah, they both said they won, right? So the Union will claim victory. And they will claim victory because they stopped the Confederate incursion, but they also retreat. So did they win? Did they not win? It gets complicated. I think we can clearly say, and without any doubt, not just who won, but who lost. The soldiers that are fighting it absolutely lost this particular battle. And this is where we start to see the deadliness of two massive, mostly untrained armies kind of clashing with each other. Because they're fighting in European styles, but Europeans often have either very professional armies or very unprofessional armies. But if you look at these armies, they're half trained by most standards of Napoleonic style of war. And so they're just being sent at each other. And you can see the deadliness of these new weapons too, of the mini ball, of long distance, fighting. Here is one of the battle maps. And so when I'm asking you what lives in modern memory, that's what the battle is. But what I want to try to capture for you in the next couple of minutes is what it felt like to be right here. What it felt like to be on the home front, what it felt like to be trying to hear what's going on. Because if you actually look at the papers and what the papers are reporting, it's pretty interesting. So obviously this is the anniversary, September 17th. They run a paper on September 18th with a tiny little column because it happened right before printing. And he said, a severe battle was fought in Maryland yesterday. A right was rested on the Sharpsburg Pike, and 2 miles this side of Sharpsburg on our left is said to be in Teedham Creek near Potterstown. The rebels are falling back to Harper's Ferry dispirited. So he's saying the rebels retreated, we won. And you also might notice, if you look at the screen, do you notice the spelling of Antietam? It's because he's hearing about this, the editor, but he doesn't necessarily know where this is. Why would he? It's a tiny little town, right? Well, tiny little place, actually. He's referring to by the road, Sharpsburg Pike. And so he's not that familiar. So, it's a tiny little river that why would he know what it is? And so it's very unclear of where this is. Then he goes on to say, at the hour of going to press, it is impossible to give any reliable particulars of the great events of yesterday. So he knows there's big armies involved. He said, we have achieved glorious victory. General Longstreet is wounded and prisoner in our hands. How's your Civil War history? No. This was a rumor. This was sent basically the day of printing. This just happened the previous day when this newspaper came out, but they would have had to print it the night before. So this is probably day of kind of stuff. They're hearing possibly through the telegraph, possibly through just, regular old rumor mill. And then he goes on to say, General Hooker is wounded in the foot. That's true. That actually happened. But General Longstreet is not shot. General Longstreet is not a prisoner of the Union Army. That is wishful thinking or just something somebody thought they heard, because war can get pretty exaggerated. But it's so early, they can't double check. Yeah, but since he was safe and well by Gettysburg, we know that this isn't true. And then things get really sad. And this is where I'm going to show my humanity, even though I'm a guest speaker, and I'm going to do my very best to read from this newspaper and not cry. I will try. So this is September 25th. This is the next printing of the Tribune, because it did not print every day. And he ran this on page 1, wounded and killed. It takes but a little space in the columns of daily papers, but what long household stories and biographies are every one of these strange names we read over and forget. Wounded and killed, some eye reads the name, to whom it is as dear as life, and some heart is struck and broken with the blow made by the name on the list. Is it our Henry, our James, our Thomas, that lies with his poor broken limbs in the hospital, or white and still, ghastly face on the battlefield? Alas for the eyes that read, alas for the hearts that feel. He was my pretty boy that I sung to sleep so many times in my arms. Says the poor mother, bowing in anguish that cannot be uttered. He was my brave, noble husband, the father of my little orphan children, sobs the stricken wife. He was my darling brother, and that I loved so and that I was proud of, murmurs the sister amid tears. And so the terrible stroke falls on homes throughout the land. Wounded and killed, every name that lies on the list is a lightning stroke to some heart, and breaks like thunder over some home, and falls like a long black shadow upon some hearthstone. And then on page 3, he runs this column, which is the wounded of people from Altoona. He doesn't say, be careful what you're reading, but he does. This list, they're not even sure about. But he does say this: we advise that those who intend to visit their wounded friends not be in too great haste. They may not be today where they were yesterday, and they can have no assurance that they will find them until they are placed in a regular hospital in some of the cities. That's the new hospital system. They're being removed from the battlefield, put in places that they're safe and that they can recover. But if you look at how long the list. Here. The printing's tiny, so I could fit it on a page. And these are all men from Altoona on this particular list. This isn't all the battlefield wounded. This is just people from this place. Not the guys who carried the battle flag, but mostly men who were part of the 125th. The 125th was just formed. He says right here in the newspaper, on the day of the engagement, the 125th had only been in organization for 5 weeks, during which the boys had received but little training. And then he goes on to defend them and say what happened wasn't their fault. He says the boys stood their ground firmly and they would have been surrounded and captured had not the colonel given the order to fall back. And retreating in the Civil War is a very big deal. It's not something you ever want to do. It's not something you're proud of, but he says they had to. A portion of the regiment did not hear the order. So that means they didn't retreat when everybody else retreated, and only became aware of it when they found themselves alone, rebels within 20 yards of them. And then he goes on to say that they continued to fight bravely anyway. He's defending their honor and death. And that's the 125th. And if you can imagine, since it only had been formed 5 weeks before that, their families thought that they were going to be in training that whole time. They thought that they were going to dig dishes around DC or something. But now all of a sudden they're in the middle of a battle that they're not prepared for, and their losses really show that. And then he goes on to say that they didn't disgrace their name. He's trying to comfort their families and tell them, you know what, they died honorably. And he knows this because unlike every other battle that I've seen reported in the local news here, he actually was there. Not during the battle, but right after. This is October 2nd, so a little bit after. And he says that he visited Antietam, the battlefield, and the hospitals. And that is so unusual. Normally, they're getting their information from soldiers from, the lightning telegraphs, or from other sources, maybe from the military itself. But now he's actually been there, and he says, it's not our intention to attempt a full portrayal of the horrors, which in the early part of last week marked the battlefield of Antietam, though we doubt not a portion of our account will be sufficiently horrible. He actually went there in order to see it. And he said that, he gives all this account. It's a whole page in the newspaper. It is very rare for reporting to be that long. And he said that he saw what he calls success Confederate prisoners. And he said that he felt that they were actually being treated quite well. And then he also said that he just described the battlefield a little bit. And I'll just read a tiny portion of what he says. He said the fields and woods were strewn with torn hats, coats, pants, shoes, canteens, haversacks, cartridge boxes, muskets, good and broken gun cartridges, etc. And in the graves of Union soldiers who had been buried where they fell, gave to every field the appearance of a vast cemetery. It's hard stuff. And they actually run this. And you have to remember, most of the people reading it, probably if they didn't have a direct family member fighting in this particular war, they knew somebody who was. And so if we can imagine how hard it would be for them to hear something like this, and many of them would have wanted to do something about it, anything about it, either directly or indirectly. And I wanted to show you, just to take us away from war and death for a minute, some of the things that people here did. This is Annie Bell, not technically from Altoona, Bellwood, obviously, but she became a nurse. And So this is a famous picture. How many people have seen this image before? Okay. Did you know that it had a local connection? Okay, some of us. And we actually found a letter that was written by her, and she said that, I send you a picture, one of the persons you will perhaps recognize, referring to herself. 2 weeks ago, some of the sanitary commission people came to me and asked that I, allow an artist to take a hospital scene. I once said no, because I would not consider becoming so public. But they said that if I did not, they should, if I did, they did not wish to tell my name, that only the hospital and ward. So for the benefit of the soldiers, I consented. And now there's quite a rage for the picture. And she was shocked. And then I'll just skip to the end. But she said, it makes me laugh to think of it becoming saleable and folks making money out of me. And I don't mean to say it gives me any pleasure, but it makes me feel very strangely. So, she's trying to be modest. She's like, oh, no, I'm not enjoying the attention, but it's all about the soldiers. We don't know how she really felt, but she definitely wanted to demur here. But others helped more indirectly, and I won't tell you her whole life story, though it's very interesting. I have a presentation where she's a major component, but this is the writing of a young woman from Altoona named Kate Gwynn. Kate Gwynn had 3 brothers. One of them was in command of another unit in the 76. One of her younger brothers went to battle under the command of her brother, and then the youngest brother was apparently kind of just messed around a lot. He's described as liking his liquor too much, and he was also, just to add a little humor here, he was also something they called a freehand poet or an offhand poet. He styled himself the sweet singer of Pennsylvania, and he would get up and make up poetry in front of a room full of people and just like freehand the rhymes that he was doing. My students, we have to have a little levity after Antietam. My students referred to this as an epic rap battle in history. Because they would actually compete with each other. So he and the sweet singer of Michigan started yelling at each other and taking out ads in the newspaper against each other. And I know. And one of them said that he would make the cups rattle in the sink. So it's serious. So anyway, her brothers went to war, but the youngest brother, Maxwell, was drafted. That's the poet. And she decided that she was going to try to support her brothers. She's also a school teacher in a time when there actually weren't that many women who were school teachers. I know we don't have that perception, but it's kind of early. And so she decided that she and a couple of other women are going to start a group that she refers to as the Patriot Daughters. But what's funny is the Altoona Tribune runs this ad on September 4th, it runs this column saying, "Attention, ladies, shall we have a ladies' aid society in this place? And other towns not a third as large as Altoona have their societies, and they are doing an incalculable amount of good." And, Kate Gwyn's not going to take this lying down. So on the 25th, so almost the next newspaper that comes out, she says, Messieurs editors, it has been asked, why do not the ladies of Altoona do something for the comfort of the sick and wounded soldiers? We would say in reply that, while we have not had an organized society since last year, yet during this time individuals have been leaving constantly, and with quite a number of boxes have been sent to different hospitals. And then she went on to say that they preserved fruit and they sent bandages and all the things that they did. So, they're called out, and she's like, oh, no. Here's what we've done. So she calls them out back. I mean, she won't have the right to vote in her lifetime. That's pretty gutsy. And she's very interesting, kind of forward-thinking in a lot of ways. But a lot of people would do their best to organize benefits for the soldiers. They would send equipment. They would send, anything that they could to help the soldiers along. And Kate Gwynn is one of them. But I have another presentation on her if anyone's ever interested. The other thing, I'm a Kate Gwynn fan. The other thing that they did, and this is going back to the sad part, is that they started trying to organize what to do with the dead. This has a connection for me. I've actually played as part of the 46th Pennsylvania at a ceremony at this cemetery, but they set aside a circle in Fairview Cemetery to shelter soldiers of the borough, and that still exists. So they are even early on, and this is running not that long after Antietam, so this is in that late September, early October time period. They are trying to figure out what to do with the dead. Because if you recall, now we're actually starting to get some bodies of the dead sent home, since embalming is a thing. So some people are able to have their remains make their way home, and they want a place to honor those dead. So on the home front, they did their best to honor those who did not survive as well as those who did. But getting back to war, the 62nd went from Antietam where they did not fight. So the 62nd guarded some cannons. They weren't in action. They were in reserve. But they did fight at Fredericksburg. And on the 15th of November, Blaine writes home, and we don't know what Blaine said. This is right before Blaine deserts. This is what the newspapers ran. We have on hand a letter from our welcome correspondent Blaine, which we are very sorry we cannot publish, on the account of strictures therein on officers connected with the government. Blaine is mistaken in his surmises. Consequently, his argument, good though it may be, fails entirely. A few weeks will tell whether his predictions are correct. At this time, he must excuse us for not adding an additional firebrand to an already extensive conflagration. Fire. So he's writing something about the officers or about his frustrations with the army. We don't know what. This was not preserved. And then right after that is Fredericksburg. Blaine writes home, and this is the last time we hear from him. He said, I was witness to such heartrending sights as I hope to never see again. Before you blame him, the life of an average Civil War soldier is very, very difficult. And he expects glory and shining and awesomeness and honor. And what he gets is mud and terrible food and what he views as horrific officers and loss after loss of the people around him. And he doesn't want to handle it anymore, most likely. He never comes back to the area. He does survive the war, but he ends up bouncing around Wisconsin and then West Virginia and various places. But he never comes home because one would imagine he can't face the people who did continue to fight. Which brings us to Gettysburg. So why is there such a gap? Because when Blaine is gone, there is no war correspondent for the 62nd anymore. None of the journals pick up in this time. So I can tell you very little about what their experiences are. I could go through the battles and the different engagements they fought in, but I can't tell you what they thought, which is what I'm interested in sharing with you. But what's crazy is when we get to Gettysburg, I can tell you exactly what they thought. And that is because of the home front. Because R.N. Martin, sergeant of the unit, decides they've been force marching all night. They're exhausted. They're trying to intercept these forces. They're going to meet at Gettysburg. They arrive right in time for the second day. Really, not a whole lot of people are fighting on the first day. They're all running to get there. They've marched all night. He says, this morning finds me sitting on a stone wall, momentarily expecting the fight to commence. Marching over 100 miles in 6 days, we are very much fatigued. Can you imagine 100 miles in 6 days? Sleeping on the ground, eating what you have, eating what you can get. And so what he does, he's hearing the battle. He knows it's going to be bad. He's not stupid. If you look at his writings, he's very intelligent. And so he decides he needs to write home to his aunt and to his mother. Because if he dies, he wants his mother to hear from him one last time. So he sits there, writes on stationery, which soldiers, often had, and sits there saying, hey, I'm right outside the battlefield. I can hear it going on. And then he just talks about his day like everything's pleasant and fine. Gives them one last good memory. And then he says later that he asked a local civilian, a local person from the town, to deliver it to the mail for him. And he sends it off. And then he goes into battle. For John Garden, he says that they are camped at 12 midnight, about 5 miles from Gettysburg, having come 9 miles from this evening. This is his journal. This is a letter. This is a journal. And what's really interesting about this is they both go together into battle at the wheat field. R.N. Martin's first sergeant, Garden's one of the other sergeants at this time. I think he was acting second because of casualties, but he may have been a little lower. It's a little hard to tell. And there is not one attack at the wheat field in Gettysburg. I borrowed this just so that you can kind of see how chaotic that it would be. This is from the Civil War Trust. And they're being attacked. So they're right here next to the 4th Michigan, which is what this famous image is. But they are right next to them. And the armies are coming in on all sides. And at one point, they are completely encircled. They're completely surrounded. Later on, Garden, who gets through the battle, says, the men stood to the work bravely, never yielding an inch, and loading and firing as coolly as if they were on drill. And then he says, for a time, it was hand-to-hand engagement. Muskets were clubbed, pistols and sabers were used in the struggle. And unlike what the movies present, hand-to-hand fighting in the Civil War was pretty rare. They didn't often. They tried to retreat. They tried not to engage. They tried to shoot at each other because if you are close enough that you can't load your musket, you are too close. And yet they're fighting, hand to hand. The 4th Michigan loses their flag, and the flag is the honor of their unit. And they're fighting over getting that back, and they're fighting for it. And they're mostly destroyed, the 4th Michigan. For our guys from Blair County, they actually go 2 different ways. And this is why the documentation we have is really neat. For Sergeant Martin, his group is cut off from the rest of the unit, and the men with him and he are captured by Confederates, led away to the back of the battlefield, and taken to a Confederate, eventually, prisoner of war camp. He claims to have seen Lee in Longstreet on his way out. But we have his full account of what happened. And what's crazy is Sergeant Garden didn't get captured. And so this unit gets split. Half goes to a prisoner of war camp in the South, which incidentally is run by the same guy who's later hanged for Andersonville. So you know how bad it is. And the other half, they're fine, they're here, so I can tell you the complete story from both of their perspectives, from both of these sergeants. That almost never happens. It's incredibly rare. And what Martin said was that they arrived at Gettysburg, on the 2nd, they stacked arms, they rested, and then he said, I wrote you a short letter and gave it to a civilian to mail. That's the letter I just showed you. So he's actually referring to it in his account. So we know it's real and we know what happened with it. Around 2 p.m., the bugle sounded, and he said they found themselves at work much sooner, found them flanked, almost surrounded, and they were receiving fire from 3 sides. And they retreated as fast as they could, but 39 of them, including him, was entirely cut off and taken prisoner. But he said, but not until we had done them much damage and made them not only die by bullets, but by the cold steel. And then he said, we were quickly turned to the rear guard by 2, sometimes 3 Rebs, and then he takes the opportunity to make fun of them. The rear presented a good number of skulkers and cowards, which beats anything of the kind in our army. So he's calling the Confederates a bunch of cowards. And then they were marched to the rear. And this, I just wanted to show it to you. So if you just look at it for a moment. This is the Garden Journal. So this is him writing about what's happening the day before the battle. Do you notice the handwriting is really even? Do you notice everything spelled correctly? Here's the day of the battle. It's over the side. Do you see he's crossing stuff out? It's about the only time I see him consistently misspelling things as well. And for me, that's about as close to being able to get inside his head as I can get. It's not what he's saying. It's the stress that you can see of the way that he's saying it. And notice also the printing's all different angles. That's about the only example in the journal of that. Whether he's tired, whether he's exhausted, whether he's stressed, whether it's the day after or it's the day of, and he's just writing when he comes back, I don't know. But he's writing his thoughts, yeah.
We happen to have letters that my grandfather wrote during World War I. He wrote them all in pencil.
Yeah.
And when he would say, we've been up all night, but you have taking time to write, his handwriting was sloppy and misspellings, and he was a superb writer. So I often think it's fatigue.
Probably.
Taking the time. I mean, stress, of course, everything you mentioned, but fatigue plays a big, especially in a change in the handwriting.
Yeah.
From normal to not normal.
Yeah. And we know what they went through. And we know that most of their officers are wounded or missing or gone. So we don't even know of the group he's with if he's in charge at that point. Like it's a lot. And plus they've been marching 100 miles in few days. So I mean, I'm sure he's exhausted too. And then it kind of goes back to normal. And then the next days it does get a little bit better too.
Where is the
Okay.
journal?
Oh, good question. The journal is in the Gilder Lehrman Institute. And the reason we know that is because both of these accounts came to us through very weird ways. One of my students, a young gentleman, was sitting there researching because they were working with me on this project to try to find as much information as we could. And we found this one had been auctioned, but we were able to backtrack it to the Gilder Lehrman Institute.
Where is the Gilder Lehrman?
New York. Yep. And it's actually available digitally online. You just have to request it. And I think they do have a small fee. But they were able to send it to me because of this project. What's crazy, and I'll preview this now, but I'll give you more details later. This one is nowhere that you can get a hold of it. This is the copy that I have. And it is in an unknown archive. So hold your thought on that one. I'll tell you this story in a little bit. It's kind of a doozy. But you cannot find a copy of this one because it doesn't exist. It's in somebody's hands, but we do not know who, and they won't make it public. Just to finish up Gettysburg, John Garden said the brigade suffered severely, casualties included R.N. Martin, first sergeant missing, supposed prisoner. So they're kind of aware of what happened, but they're just telling each other what's going on and trying to figure it out because there's no clear way to tell. For R.N. Martin, his account said that bayonets were used on him for trying to get water or buy bread from the ladies in the town. And he said that the women in the north, waved their handkerchiefs and said to cheer up. And they said that they would give him bread, but the cavalry, of which we probably assume is most likely Jeb Stuart, but we don't really know, said that they would burn their houses if they, if they helped the Union guys or gave them bread. And then he said that all remained quiet for most of the day. They got half a pint of flour and some fresh meat. But he said that he stayed up late because he didn't want to cook it. He wanted to have breakfast to start up on, and then somebody stole it during the night. So then he had nothing. He also said that they bought 2 pies for a quarter silver, which he divided with his hungry messmates. And he saw some men pay $5 for 2 pounds of bacon and $2 to $5 for bread. Now, your average Civil War private is making $12 a month. So paying $5 for a loaf of bread is insane. But they were doing it because they were hungry. And it's not that the Confederates were necessarily deliberately starving them. They didn't have a lot of resources themselves, except for what they had taken from, Pennsylvania. In the prison camp, and I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I think it's interesting, they had an even harder time getting food. Food was not often provided. And he said, a Yankee is a Yankee, any place, particularly when hungry and without money. So what they did was they counterfeited money. They got to making greenbacks and postage currency out of paper and pencil and ink, using pokeberries for the ink for the seal and juice of weeds to paint the green. And then he said just the thing to trade at night when many a guard was fooled by them. The guards had to trade at night because they would be whipped if they were caught trading with prisoners during the day. So they couldn't tell if it was counterfeit. And he said to look at them at daylight, they were a rough sketch. The goddess of liberty looked as if she had not washed her face or dressed herself in a clean gown for a year. And then he said that they were often searched, and eventually prisoners were called out to go north, but he wasn't among them. And then they were training trinkets made out of bones and other things. And they felt assured if exposure did not kill us, we would be released someday. So they were part of prisoner exchanges. But like I said, it's for the man who was hanged for Andersonville, so the conditions are pretty awful. And once he takes command, they get worse. And then they come home, or at least some of them do. So R.N. Martin is paroled. Garden keeps fighting the whole time. After Gettysburg, they don't have enough people in the 62nd to make another unit, and some of them are rolling out. Their time is done. And so they disbanded. So 25 men ended up transferring to the 91st PA. And they fought for the rest of the war. They fought through the surrender of Appomattox, including R.N. Martin. Can you imagine? Gettysburg, Fredericksburg, edges of Antietam, surviving all that, surviving a prison camp, and he signs up to continue to fight when he could have gone home with honor, but he chose not to. And then eventually the war ends. This is Victory, Richmond Hours. It's run in the Altoona Tribune. And they return, it said they returned on Wednesday of last week, and the regiment passed through hard service and won, imperishable honors, a fair share of which belonged to Company M. That they left with 82 men, and only 25 returned with the unit. Now, that doesn't mean they all died. Some of them left. Some of them were medically discharged for a variety of reasons. A number were killed in battle, and others were previously discharged on account of physical disability caused by wounds. But then there comes the question of, what do we do now? And what's interesting is you can follow them in the newspapers. They get jobs, they get married. Fair share of them start to work for the railroad. A couple become house painters. They just go and live life. They get, normal lives for the most part, but they also fight about who controls the flag, because the flag is their legacy. And they have 2 different units of veterans, so 2 different organizations of veterans. But what's kind of interesting is they decide to start having reunions, but then you also see their funerals. So I didn't put all their funerals on there. It's a little depressing, but it's this person died. Here's the list of pallbearers that were in his unit. This person died. Here's the list, but it's smaller. This person died. Here's the list, but it's smaller because time is getting to them. and they start to wonder how they're going to be remembered. They start to raise money for the different memorials. They start to raise money for the memorial in Gettysburg. But then they start to fight over who controls the flag, because they've got two different units, and the units are divided on political lines. So I'll read you a quote, and you can see how unpleasant it gets. Please do not put our modern points of view in here. Esquire made bold to say that the flag was made by the Republican Party and belonged to Republicans alone. This sort of claptrap is very cheap, if it were not just insulting to a large number of our citizens. Mr. John Mufti, a Democrat, an old soldier, a member of the Grand Army of the Republic, has in his possession a flag inscribed with the names of 36 engagements on which it was carried, including the Battle of Gettysburg. It was presented to his regiment by the ladies of Hollidaysburg and was borne by Democrats whenever unfurled. And then the next article, regrettably, we seem to have made a mistake yesterday in attributing to Ambrose Esquire the declaration that the American flag was made by the Republican Party and belongs to Republicans alone. And then they said, we're sorry. But they can't decide who should have it, because they can't decide which of their two posts of the Grand Army of the Republic should control it, because one is Republican and one is Democrat, and they're fighting over it. So it's kind of funny that their own infighting gets in the way of, being able to carry on their legacy. And then it ends up in the possession of Michael Halloran, who takes it to eventually the Borough Council. He goes to different Grand Army of the Republic presentations with it. They get together, they hold parades, they take the flag there. He is said to have had the flag preserved for the first time, which is put into a frame that is there. And then it was eventually in 1905, so a lot of time has passed since 1865, right? In 1905, it was presented to the Hollidaysburg Council and said, okay, Council, keep this, hold on to it. But the Borough Council decided that eventually they didn't want control of it, and no one was seeing it in the council building. So it was brought out the next year to the GAR encampment, the Grand Army of the Republic, this reunion of Union veterans, and was presented along with the actual battle flag, which is here. It's the battle flag of the entire regiment. This is some of the reporting on it. And then time passes. It's getting lost in the borough, no one's seeing it, and so the son of one of the last surviving members, Orrin P. Finney, he decides that it needs to be moved to a place where people actually study it, and he decides that a high school where people are going through every day and learning things is the appropriate place to put this. Plus, a fireproof building has just been created. That is the current Hollidaysburg Junior High. It's a new building, it's fancy, and they decide to put it there. So here's the pamphlet. They held a ceremony. We can tell you exactly the music they played, exactly what they said, in February 13th of 1939. John Snyder, who is the son of H.H. Snyder, who, by the way, also had an extensive Civil War journal that we cannot find, that he read from at the dedication of the monument in Gettysburg, held the ceremony and said this is what his father would have wanted as well. And then time passed, everyone forgot what it was, and it was supposed to be thrown away. But some of you probably know Jan Kinney. She was the library at the high school at the time. Somebody came in, this is one of her letters that she wrote about this to Dr. Gilday in 2016. And the descendants came in and asked to see the flag, and she said, "What flag?" And they said, no, there's a flag here from the Civil War. And she asked around, nobody knew what it was. And there was a very old custodian named Bill Morimer. And Bill Morimer said, "Oh yeah, they said to take it down and throw it away, so I hid it in my office." Yeah, if not for one person. And then she decided that she was going to take charge of it, and she hung it up beside her office. And then when the new high school was built, she brought it over to the new high school. And this is I don't actually know that we know the date of this, but I think it's sometime in the 80s, was the flag on display and people seeing it. But then it started to deteriorate. It was glued to the frame. Yeah, those of you who know history, glue is acidic. So it's not that they intended any harm, they just didn't know. It's very thin silk, they tried to preserve it, but also it's not behind UV glass, and so it started to fade and started to deteriorate. And so the high school decided the safest place was to put it in the office. And apparently somebody came in 2015 and asked Dr. Gilday about it, and Dr. Gilday said, as happened in the past, "What flag?" And then he came to me and said, "Hey, you teach an elective on the Civil War. What do you know about this flag?" I'm like, "What flag?" So, because I didn't know. And so we decided then that we were going to raise the money to have this conserved, which eventually we did with many community partners. We decided to, raise funds, and the students from the high school decided that they were going to throw a ball to raise money for this, just like supposedly happened on the first time that it was dedicated. And so we eventually did get the money, and we sent it to Heinz History Center to be conserved. And here's what's crazy. The lady who took it apart and started to put, solvents on it to dissolve the glue said that you could smell gunpowder. Yeah, that you could smell the Civil War, which is, I know, I wish I had been there. It's crazy. But it says, as it was cleaned, a slight smell of smoke was noted. It's feasible this flag may have been in the battles it said it was. And then there's a whole report with it. And this is some of the History Club research. So they found the Garden Journal in the Gilder Lehrman Institute. That was easy. They found the Orrin Martin account. That was not easy. So it was easy to find. We got some names, we were looking up different names, and they were like, oh my goodness, there's his uniform, and you can recognize it from the picture. There's his journals. Yes. So the problem was this was 2015, and it had been auctioned off in Gettysburg in 2013. And I said, oh, well, I'll call the auction house, see what they say. They said, oh yeah, we put it with a uniform that belonged to the same guy. His name's on the tag on the inside. And we sold it to an auction house in California. And I said, oh, okay. So I called them. Didn't hear anything back for the longest time. And then their curator, David Card, called me and he said, I'm sorry if I lose you. I'm on a plane on the way to Japan to buy some artifacts. And I'm like, sounds cool. And so I said, hey, here's the project, here's who we are. He's like, well, obviously I can't tell you who bought it. And I was like, no, I didn't expect you to. But he's like, send me a letter and I will give it to him. And then he sent me an email saying that he met the collector who has this at a trade show, and he handed him a file with 2 photocopies. And this just showed up in my mailbox after spring break or summer break. And it's the coolest thing. But who has it? No idea. And they told me that their one condition was that I tell them what I did with it, which would have been easier if I knew who they were. But here we are. So, hopefully maybe they'll hear us and send us more information. But I think this is most of it. It looks like a lot there, but it's hard to tell. But it included both the letter and the kind of journal. I call it an account because it's a copy of his journal. And then this is the end. This is the dance that was held. So the dance that was held, there's the flag, there's the descendants of Michael Halloran holding the flag, and then the students dressed in various borrowed Civil War reenactment gear. We danced, we had orchestration, and then we dedicated the flag. And then what's really cool, but probably the scariest moment of my life, we took it back to the battlefield at Gettysburg for the anniversary of the battle. So the flag went in a convoy, and a military convoy, full military honors the whole way across the state. And we were all invited to speak. Why it was scary for me was I'm the only one who's done the research, so I had to speak. But it was General, Congressperson, head of the Park Service, Miss Amy Dodson. I'm like, but honestly, I'm the only one who can tell the stories because I'm the only one who knows them. They talked about battle and flags and war, and I talked about Orrin Martin and bravery and heroism and deciding to continue to fight even when it's hard. That's a very different kind of story. And now that I've researched more, I can talk about people here too, backing up the soldiers, continuing to fight in their own way, going through war secondhand through the newspapers, watching this happen to people that they care about. They're all part of the story, and it's not a story we hear often. So hopefully you learned a little bit. But thank you guys, you've been wonderful. If you have questions, let me know.